I just remember on my first day, back then we kept, paper logs, and the general manager, Rona, she brought this giant notebook over to me. And she said, these are the discrepancies that we've had at LTW for 18 months. And she's like, look at them. And I'm flipping through, and it's page after page of nothing. It's just blank pages. And I said, there's nothing here. And she's like, exactly. Our spots cost $1,000 a minute. We don't make mistakes. And that really puts perspective on for you. Most people have the radio dream of, the record's running out. I can't get the next song.
Yeah, totally.
To this day, I still have the dream, except I'm at LTW and I can't find a commercial. That's the nightmare for me.
Benztown president Dave Chachi Dennis loves radio and all of his radio friends.
Hey, Chachi.
Hey, everybody.
Because Chachi loves everybody.
My next guest has over 35 years of broadcast experience. He's worked at legendary stations throughout the U.S., including LTW in New York City, LIT in Chicago, and K-Big in Los Angeles, my alma mater. He's also widely known for his service to the community and industry. He serves on the boards of the NAB and RAB Leadership Committee, Big Brothers, Big Sisters of America, and the Library of American Broadcasting Foundation. Please welcome the president of the Multicultural Business and Development for iHeartMedia and the president of the Black Information Network, Tony Coles.
Hi, thank you.
Man, thank you, Tony. I so greatly appreciate you taking the time. And as I was doing research for this, I shouldn't say I can't believe, but I'm so happy for you. You are so big time. I can't believe you're literally part of the corporate officers of iHeart. When you go onto the website, it's like Bob Pittman and John Sykes and you're right there as, one of the corporate C-suite executives. I think of you as just as Tony, but you've become a really big time executive. Well, does it feel that way?
No, I mean, and thank you for the kind words. And it is humbling. It is humbling, especially because when I first got into this business, I had no idea what I could do. I had, aspirations of running the board at WNCI. So to be in this space now is truly humbling, and it's exciting. I love it. I absolutely love it.
I read a recent interview that you did in Barrett Sports Media. You said, I say this to people all the time. If my dad was still alive, I'd say it to his face. I owe everything I have and am to that man. Tell me a little bit about your father and growing up in Ohio.
So for those who haven't heard the story, and I know my close friends are sick of the story, but my dad, aside from just being a great man, he grew up during the Depression and came from a very large family, and they couldn't afford all of the kids, to feed all of the kids during the Depression. So his father put a rule into place that, when you were 13, you either had to work and help support the family, or you had to leave because they just couldn't take care of you. And he said that was such an important part of his life and the person that he became, that he was going to have the same role, but he was going to give me a grace period. I had until 16 to get a job or get out of the house. And one day I came home from school and there were boxes in my room. And I asked him, what was going on? And he said, well, you're almost 16 and I don't see you looking for a job. So I just want to make it easier for you to move out. Do I think he would have kicked me out of the house? I don't think so. Was I willing to find out? Absolutely not. And so, so I started, looking for a job. And luckily for me, the first place that I was able to get a job was at a local radio station. And so I started working, after school and weekends. So literally and figuratively, Dad changed my life.
I mean, I love that work ethic, and it's obviously it's paid off for you. You are one of the hardest working guys I know, and to see you succeed and to have that kind of instilled at you at an early age is, I think, probably very difficult at 16 years old. And I'm sure that caused a lot of anxiety, but it was also a great catalyst. And I think your dad certainly saw the potential in you. Tell me a little bit about your first gig. Was that in your hometown of Zanesville?
Yeah. So it was WHIZ. It was an AM, FM, and TV combo. And, like a lot of small markets, you worked every job that was available. And so I got to do everything from being on the air on the AM, running the board on the FM, running camera for the nightly news on the TV station, on the NBC affiliate. It was a fantastic experience. And I look back now, that was just an opportunity that too few people ever get in their career. And quite honestly, I'm still shocked that I even got that opportunity, but I'm so thankful for it.
Well, you made the most of it. And from there, you parlayed that into going to school at Ohio University. You studied telecommunications management, and you also worked as the morning edition anchor at OUB. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I had never heard of NPR. I'd never heard of public radio until I went to OU, but it was such a great experience. And for me, again, a kid without any money, being able to do morning edition, because OU at the time, I think they still do, paid any of the students that worked for the college radio station. And so,
oh really?
Yeah, which most colleges don't do that.
Yeah.
You have to audition, and fortunately for me, I'd been working since I was just a little past 15, and so I was able to land the morning edition gig. I can't necessarily say being a college student and being a morning radio person is a combination that I would advise to many folks, but it was a great opportunity.
And you left OU, went to Vernon to QIO to pursue on air. So at this point, I know you got the full experience of, at HIZ, and you also got to do some TV work there. Are you really, though, focused at this point in your career of being on air?
At that point, I was. I mean, in full transparency, I was more focused on being employed and paying rent. I never say I have regrets, but one of the things that will always gnaw at me is, I didn't finish my college career at OU. I graduated elsewhere, but I ran out of money while I was at OU. And was looking for, a way to pay the bills, and the opportunity at WQIO came up. And that's where I began my decades-long friendship with John Zellner, because John was leaving OU as I was entering, and John got a job at WQIO, and that's how that station got on my radar. And so that was a great experience, but loved that radio station.
And this is now kind of your first full-time job, if you will, because you were part-time and then you were a student. What was that transition? Now you really are out on your own. In my mind, it's a little bit different once you're out of school and you don't have anything to fall back on. Yeah,
I mean, first of all, for anyone who ever crossed through Ohio or drove through Ohio at that time, that was an incredible radio station. Like it was incredibly well programmed. The production values were amazing. So to me, this was not only working at a big radio station for me, but also, to your point, you're out on your own, and it's like, wow, this is my career now. This is what I'm doing.
But I'm sure incredibly exciting as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And from Mount Vernon, you start to work your way up to bigger markets. You go to Columbus, and you're at XGT at Columbus, also doing on air. What shift are you doing there?
Overnights.
Okay.
Overnights. Those were during the great days of not only overnight shifts, but 4-hour shifts. And so,
No way. So you're doing like 2 to 6, or?
I think it started at 2 to 5, and then they shifted around the morning show and 2 to 6. But again, great full-time hours.
Yeah, sure.
It was a different time.
And getting your 10,000 hours in as an on-air talent, what a great place to do it.
Yeah.
And then you move your way up to SNY, which is I think the first AC station you begin to work at, and you've become such a legendary AC programmer. VKO, and now you're also doing on air, but you get your first real kind of management gig as APD and MD. What was that transition like, going from on air to now having responsibility with helping manage and schedule music at the station?
I really enjoyed that. And again, it's one of those things where in the moment it looked like a cool job, but I didn't really know what I was getting into. But the more I did it, the more I loved it. And that, I would say, was the beginning. It wasn't the tipping point, but it was the beginning of that gravitational pull towards, oh, there are other things besides being on the air. I still enjoyed being on the air, but I was highly intrigued on the programming side.
I'd heard in one of your interviews, I think the one that Bob Pittman did with you in Math and Magic, that you were very, very introverted, and your mom was an integral part of getting you to be more extroverted and get you through the fear of speaking publicly. How did that kind of work in terms of like being on the air at such a young age? How did you overcome that?
So I'm still the introvert. I've just found ways to mask it. But yeah, no, I have to thank my mom for pushing me this direction because, obviously what we do for a living, you're required to be out there. But that's part of what I loved being on the air, because I was in a studio by myself, talking to myself. And so I never really allowed myself to think that there were people listening. And so for me, that part was easy. What was really hard was when I started doing remotes and appearances and introing folks. And that's when I made the connection. And maybe now that I think about it, maybe that's what led me to getting onto the programming side of things. It was just the inner introvert telling me, no, you're going to have to do more of this.
I never, until I heard on that podcast, Bob Pittman bring that up, ever thought of you as an introvert. You are one of the most well-spoken, articulate people I've ever met. I'm actually, as I listen to that and I've heard you speak, numerous other occasions, I'm really impressed. I wish I could speak and have that type of a broad vocabulary. It's very impressive. So kudos to you and doing such an amazing job of becoming a great speaker.
Well, thank you.
You must have been very successful being an APD and MD, because you get an opportunity now to go to COL, which is an oldies station in Columbus, and you become the operations manager. So does management come naturally to you, or who taught you along the way to be an effective manager?
It was something that I enjoyed from a leadership standpoint, but I have to give all the credit in the world to Dave Robbins, the late Dave Robbins at WNCI. What my resume, I guess, may or may not fully reflect is, there was a period of time where I was out of work. And what had impressed me was Dave Robbins. It didn't matter who you were, what station you were, he would immediately reach out and just offer to help. What can I do to help you? It was during that phase that I met Dave. I got to watch and see this guy in operation. And when you're competing against someone like him, you have one opinion. When you see them engaging with their staff, when you see them engaging with salespeople, you get a whole different perspective. And I vividly remember that moment sitting in his office, and I'd gone over to put together an air check. And I said, Dave, I don't want to be on the air anymore. I want to do what you do. I had worked for some great program directors, but when I met Dave, I suddenly saw that there was a different way to lead. And I wanted to be able to do for other people what I saw Dave doing for his team.
Thank you for sharing that story. I remember when I got let go back in 2009, and I had read a book. The name is escaping me right now, but it was written by a guy who had gotten very wealthy eventually in like the paper business and stationery and so forth. And he compiled 50 stories of people that had gotten let go and how they built themselves back up and went on to have successful careers or built successful businesses. And that book really touched me and helped me get through that really difficult time in my life. And for a while, when I'd read about our friends and coworkers and so forth that would get let go, I would send that book to them. And I don't send that book any longer, but I still do the best I can to email, to send a note, because I think that's so incredibly important, especially in this business that we live in, that unfortunately it happens to all of us at some point, or at least most of us. And I think we need to do a better job as an industry of being supportive of each other. So thank you for sharing that. And it turned out to be obviously a very poignant moment in your life. And so is that who hired you then at COL?
No. I mean, that's the funny thing. I can genuinely say up until the time he passed away, Dave was a part of every career move I've ever made. He was the first person I would call, and I've never worked for Dave.
No kidding.
Yeah. There was never a time that was right, but he was there for the very first move for me, and he was a part of every single conversation.
Well, thank you for sharing. I wish I could have met him. You get another opportunity to be on the air and to program at FWI in Fort Wayne. So is this the first time now that you've left Ohio and gone into another state? That was the first time I'd left Ohio. The owner of that station to this day, we're good friends, but I told him that I would never forgive him for that. Again, I never, when I got into the business, aspired to leave Ohio. It was home for me, but it was also the dead of winter. It was snowing, and I was looking at the back of R&R, and there was this giant ad for a Miami-based company that was going to launch a station, and they were looking for their very first program director to help launch the station. And to me, January in Ohio, looking at an ad for a Miami-based company, was intriguing. And then the excitement of, this is when the 80-90 docket stations were going on the air. And so to be able to sign on a brand new frequency, do it all myself from scratch was too tempting. And so went through the interview process. Really, I was so excited. I wanted this job more than anything. And then when the offer came, just casually, they mentioned, have you ever been to Fort Wayne, Indiana? and I said, no. What's in Fort Wayne? And they're like, oh, that's where we got the license. And I said, but you said Miami. And they said, well, yeah, we're based in Miami, but if we put an ad out saying Fort Wayne, we weren't sure if anybody would apply. So, but at that point, I was so excited about the opportunity and so excited about the people who were part of the ownership group. I said, you know what? I'll go anywhere to work for these folks. It was a guy named Russ Oasis. We're still friends today. It was the late Bill Tanner. It was Robert W. Walker from Y100 in Miami. I knew that I was going to learn immense amounts from them. And so begrudgingly, I moved to Fort Wayne. My girlfriend is from Fort Wayne, so I've been to Fort Wayne, and it's actually not as bad as I thought. I really liked Fort Wayne. They've got a great little, I don't know if the ballpark was in downtown when you were there, but the Tin Caps play there. It's a great little downtown. I found it very charming. You know what? It is a much different place than it was back in the early 90s. I will say that. But it was a great experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. But my disappointment that I was not going from Columbus to Miami, but Columbus to Fort Wayne, that took a while to get over. I can understand that. During this time, and your dad and your mom, who are so meaningful to you and such just beacons of leadership, were they really encouraging you through all these moves and going up and down the dial, per se? No, in fact, and I loved my parents, but, again, I grew up in a very small town, farming community, and no one ever left. And so for them, this was really kind of a mystery. It's like, well, there's a radio station here. Why do you need to go other places to work at a radio station? For years, there were two factories. There was a glass factory, and then if you've ever heard of Longaberger Baskets,
Those were made not too far from where I grew up. And anytime I would go back to visit, they would either have an application for me or try to talk me into putting in an application so that I could get a nice, stable job close to home. So they eventually figured out that wasn't going to happen. But at that particular time, they were still hoping I would come back.
I get it. I mean, it's a very nomadic business we live in, and I can see from someone that's not familiar with it, my parents were supportive. My dad always wanted me to be a doctor, and I think my mom really liked the aspect of radio, and she found it exciting. She was more the creative person in the family, but I completely get it. You want what's best for your kids, and being able to put a roof over your head and feed yourself and so forth. Sometimes this business does not allow for that. So this is now in Fort Wayne, your first PD gig. You're doing mornings. I assume, and obviously learning a lot with Bill Tanner, you now get called from Fort Wayne to LTW in New York. I mean, that is what I don't even know what Fort Wayne is, probably in the hundreds market size, to market number one. Tell me about that call and that transition.
So, and I talk about this with a lot of folks, the importance of building relationships and networking. And honestly, at the time, I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but it proved the importance of relationships. So Russ Oasis, who was the principal at the ownership group in Fort Wayne, he was very adamant that I interact with what he called greater level programmers, because he's like, that's how you learn. That's how you grow. You surround yourself. And he told me to go to every conference I could possibly go to. And so I went to the conclave in Minneapolis shortly thereafterwards, and I met Kurt Johnson, who was the PD for LTW. I was so impressed with Kurt. I heard him speak on a panel. He was amazing. And so I went up to him afterwards, and I said, hey, I've got this small radio station. I'd love for you to critique it. Give me any kind of advice you could. And that began, a great friendship and a relationship with Kurt, purely from a help me grow, help me make my radio station better. And I will never forget the day that Kurt called and said, hey, I've got an opening here and would love to talk to you. Never in a million years did I think he was actually thinking of me for the role. I thought he was trying to find out if I knew anyone for the role. And, again, there are those moments in your career, and that certainly is one of those moments in my career that I will never, ever forget. And to this day, LTW, aside from the fact that it's, the biggest station in the biggest market, that is an incredibly special place. And to get the opportunity to work there will forever be a moment for me. Unpack
getting to New York. Had you even been to New York at this point?
I went once with a college roommate and, got to do the touristy things, but actually like being there, no. And never in a million years imagine living there. And if you can imagine a kid from a small town in the Midwest moving to New York City and working in Midtown Manhattan, that was life-changing.
Did you ever see the movie Secret of My Success with Michael J. Fox?
No.
Oh, you've got to watch it. A great 80s movie, but similar story. He grows up in a small town, I think in Kansas, and he gets a job in New York City. And, he's trying to navigate his way through this gigantic concrete jungle. But reminds me, your story reminds me a lot of that. You get to work. You're now with Kurt. What was that learning curve? It sounds like you got set up very well with some phenomenal mentors along the way, and having someone like you said it was Russ Oasis who gave you the leadership to go to places like the Conclave and to network. And I think a lot of people probably aren't afforded that opportunity, because I think sometimes people are selfish and don't want their employees to go out and meet other people and so forth. So I think it's great that you were able to do that. However, you still had to have taken the initiative and really have the guts to go and make those connections and to make a move like that, which says a lot about your character. It really is a combination of fortitude and certainly, being fortunate to meet some really great mentors along the way.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. And I say this to folks all the time. You know, when you have the opportunity to go to conferences or to go to conventions and things like that, again, Russ really instilled to me, take the most of that opportunity. And I can't tell you how many times I'll be on a panel, and if you have, 100, 200 people in the room, maybe 10 or 15 will be brave enough to come up after the panel and introduce themselves. And I always say, please stay in touch with me. And maybe one person will stay in touch. And that really makes a difference. And that one person who stays in touch, you tend to remember. And, I'm living proof of that. Kurt and I stayed in touch, but it was never with the intention of someday working with him. It was just the fact that I was really impressed by how smart he was. And once I got to Light, I realized up close just how brilliant Kurt was. And that entire team at Viacom at the time was just impressive, from Bill Figgenshoe to Rona Landy, the market president. And what I will always appreciate is how invested they were in making sure that I took full advantage of the opportunity. I mean, there is a level of pressure and expectation that comes with working at a place like that you don't take lightly, out of respect for yourself, but out of respect for the institution that it is. And that probably taught me more than anything.
Sure. And the pressure's immense, especially back in that era. I mean, that was the days I can speak here, and you'll be able to speak to in a moment, because we both spent time together at K-Big. Every 10th of a point, I think they said, was $1 million. And so the precision on everything from scheduling that music to everything that went over the air to every liner that was written, I mean, it was all put under a magnifying glass.
I just remember on my first day, back then we kept, paper logs, and the general manager, Rona, she brought this giant notebook over to me. And she said, these are the discrepancies that we've had at LTW for 18 months. And she's like, look at them. And I'm flipping through, and it's page after page of nothing. It's just blank pages. And I said, there's nothing here. And she's like, exactly. Our spots cost $1,000 a minute. We don't make mistakes. And that really puts perspective on for you. Most people have the radio dream of, the record's running out, I can't get the next song.
Yeah, totally.
To this day, I still have the dream, except I'm at LTW and I can't find a commercial. That's the nightmare for me.
That is an outstanding story. You get a call now to cross the coast. You've been in New York for a couple of years working with Kurt. You're the MD, programming assistant at LTW. Now you make your way to Los Angeles, where I am right now, to become your first program director position for KXEZ and KIBB Los Angeles. Tell me about that and getting your opportunity to become a program director in market number 2.
I, to this day, talk about the fact that LA had more professional disappointments for me than I think any other point in my career. And it was absolutely the best thing that ever happened to me. It really was. But we had a station, an AC station in LA that was trying to compete with Coast, which obviously you and all of us know what a monster Coast is. But I was young enough and naive enough and arrogant enough to think that, well, if there's anybody who can take down Coast, it's going to be me. And I remember on the interview, the comment being made that it's like, all these people who have passed through these doors and no one has ever been able to take down Coast. And, what happens to you if this job only lasts 18 months? And I just, I was defiant. It's like, well, no, I can do this. I think differently. I worked at LTW, and obviously we know of Coast and KXEZ, only one of those radio stations is still a legendary radio station. But It was a humbling experience. It was a defeating experience. And it was one of the best programming experiences of my entire career. I think that too often in this business, we see people who celebrate other people's failures, which always has bothered me. But B, we see too many people who go into impossible situations. They lose. They learn nothing from that, or they let that define them. And so despite what the ratings and the final outcome may be, I learned more from that experience than I could have if I'd stayed, another 10 or 20 years at Light in New York.
So I think profound advice. You're absolutely right. It's a hero's journey in a lot of ways, but so many people will get knocked down and don't realize why they got knocked down, as opposed to learning the moves and taking that and being able to come back stronger than ever, which you obviously, and we'll unpack here in a few minutes, were able to do. Going into a situation like that, and I think sometimes success and failure is a very, very fine line. Without that ego and the bravado to be able to feel like you can do it, you would have probably stayed at LTW, which would have been a fine career. I'm not knocking that at all. But the fact that you got up and you took that swing, you struck out, but you took that swing and you learned how to hit that pitch the next time it came across the plate at the end of the day. And I think that takes a lot. That takes so much guts, man, to move from growing up in a small town to moving to the biggest city in the United States of America, which is, as we said earlier, a concrete jungle, then to cross the country, move to LA, which is another behemoth of a city and a very different culture in a lot of ways. You're still in your 20s at this point. That is very impressive. And I think it speaks a lot to just the guts and the strength that you have as a human being, because I don't know if a lot of people would have done that.
Well, thanks for giving me that compliment. My dad just said I didn't know any better. And so I think my dad probably was a little bit closer to it, but yeah, I mean, it is a scary thing. New York is a scary place to go. If you don't know, to this day, I love New York, but moving to the West Coast, was a different level of fear. I learned to embrace it, but, going to a place where I knew no one, I knew the odds were stacked against me. And that was the furthest that I had ever been from my family. That was a tough move, but it was a great move.
You fail at KXEZ. When I say fail, it doesn't work, but you learn and grow internally. How do you parlay that into the APD MD gig at KBIG?
KBIG was an interesting time. This was when stations were being bought and sold left and right, and KBIG changed ownership multiple times. I had the opportunity to go over there as an APD. And at that point in my life, I had grown to love Los Angeles so much. It felt like home to me, even though I'd been there a short period of time. And I made the conscious decision that I would rather stay in LA in a smaller role. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way, because there are people who spend their entire lives trying to get to a role like that. So I recognize that. But for me, taking the move out of the PD role and into an APD role, I was willing to do that in order to stay in Los Angeles. And again, KBIG, a legendary radio station. And the company that owned the station at the time, Evergreen, which evolved into multiple companies, had such a fantastic reputation. And, Steve Rivers was running programming for the whole chain. And that was intriguing to me. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to make a move within the same market.
And eventually, while you're there, you get to work with Johnny K. And I come in about a year after you left, but heard all these amazing stories. And in so many ways, it was just like, well, Tony did it this way. And Tony is fantastic because of this. And you need to be more like Tony. Clear Channel eventually ends up buying KBIG, and you now get to go back to becoming a program director in another phenomenal market for Warm up in Seattle. And so in 99, you move up to Seattle from LA. Was that easy for you to leave LA and go to Seattle, being you really grown to love this market?
Moving from LA personally was absolutely the hardest move. Like moving from LA was harder than moving from Ohio for me. I grew to love it that much. I have lifelong friends now, from LA. So leaving my personal circle was difficult. Professionally, going to Seattle though was great because, K-Big taught me many things. One of the things though was I really enjoyed leading people, and having spent time as the program director, leading the cluster, and then going into a role where the vision of the station wasn't mine. The ideas weren't mine. I couldn't lead the team the way that I would have if I'd been program director.
Sure.
And I believe that people thrive when they are in the spot that they know they're meant to be in. And for me, I knew I wasn't meant for that role. And so professionally, it was easy to take the opportunity in Seattle, and especially Guy Zapolian, was consulting that station at the time. And I've always had the utmost respect for Guy. And also, by the way, it was another challenge. I believe Warm was 18th place, when I got there. And so again, it was kind of a redemption opportunity. It's like, okay, I'll go into this one and I'll fix this one.
Yeah.
And that'll feel good. And knock on wood, fortunately, we took it to number one. So it was a great experience.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal story in its own right. We could do a whole episode just on how you were able to turn that around and really become I think you're revered on the AC programming level amongst the Kurt Johnsons of the world, the Jim Ryans of the world, the Johnny Kays of the world. I mean, you became a formidable AC programmer, which I find incredibly impressive, because from there you now get the opportunity to go down to Portland. You become the cluster OM for KKCW, and you're now the regional VP of programming. And so you've got basically the whole Pacific Northwest plus Alaska plus Hawaii. So now you go from, running a couple stations in Seattle to running, what is that, probably 30 plus radio stations at that point, maybe more?
Yeah, it's somewhere between 30 and 40, because for a brief period of time, we also owned stations in Idaho that we ended up selling and things like that. But that was a phenomenal thing. Leaving Seattle, again, was kind of a tough thing to do. That's where I met my wife. We got married there. We had our first kid on the way. And I get this call from Clear Channel. And I remember vividly back during those days, Clear Channel did not have a great reputation as a company. And I was not interested in going to the company. And Ed Cranf was in charge of the West Coast, and I know you've crossed paths with Ed, and he said, "Look, talk to the team. I'm going to take you to dinner. You can ask them anything you want about the company, and they have to answer you truthfully." And they did. They told me the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I left that dinner more impressed with the people than anything else. And I said, you know what? I'm willing to sign up for the bad stuff if it means I get to work with these people. Fast forward 20 years later, I'm still with the same organization, and it's still because of the people.
When you look at that transition, and so I've never worked with you directly. I know obviously so much about you and followed your career, virtually my whole career. In going back to really having an ear for AC, and my understanding is you're detail oriented. You've got just a real fundamental understanding of the business through and through, and I've learned so much just interviewing you today. How were you able to cope with going from running one or two stations to now this big group of radio stations and having to manage big personalities, and you're traveling, and the scope of the gig, it goes up by, we're not talking like a doubling. It's an order of a magnitude in how this job has grown for you. How did that transition work, and how did you cope with that?
It was not an easy transition. And, I apologize to any of the folks that had to work with me back then, because I know I made plenty of mistakes. I tried to do the best job that I possibly could for them. And hopefully they recognize that. But more than anything, I'm a naturally curious person. I like to learn. I like to grow. That particular role at that time, again, was so fascinating to me because I still tell people Hawaii, Honolulu is one of the most complicated programming markets in the country. And working with, a legendary station like KSSK and all of the properties that we had there. But I very quickly learned that I had to place my time and attention where it was going to benefit the most. And that was hard because coming from the programming side and being that day-to-day person, I knew that every PD in the region deserved my attention, deserved my time, and making that transition was difficult. But also the lesson that I had to learn was I'm not the PD anymore. I have to let them do their jobs. I have to trust them to do their jobs. My role and responsibility is to help them be better PDs. And once I could make that psychological switch of it's not my job to program these stations, my job is to make those PDs better, the job became easier. I always hate to use the word easier because they're not easy jobs, but learning my role and really coming into my comfort with that made doing that job possible.
I get it. If, just kind of looking at the timeline, within honestly a little less than 15 years, you go from being in a very small town in Ohio to now overseeing 40 radio stations across a vast geographic area with all these different personalities. It's an impressive rise. You've had some incredible mentors along the way, but I'm not sure anyone can quite prepare you for that role until you're thrown into it. Not that you were thrown into it, but
there's no preparation for that. There's no preparation for that.
So you now, after being the VP of Program, Regional VP of Programming, you get called back to now, and I think you're one of the few people I know. I can only think of you and one other that has programmed in New York, LA, and now Chicago. You go to LIT in Chicago. And is that chronologically after Darren got promoted? Did you go to run LIT after him?
Yes.
Okay. So another legendary radio station. How does that happen?
So Darren Davis was running Chicago. Darren and I originally crossed paths when I was at K-Big. He was programming our Washington, D.C. stations. And so just through company meetings, Darren and I, got to know one another. And when he was getting promoted at the company, he reached out and he said, I'd like to recommend you to be my replacement in Chicago. And, again, I've had all of these moments with radio stations in my career that it's like, I never imagined that opportunity. And to your point, it's a rare occurrence, to be able to work at, 3 of the biggest AC stations in 3 of the biggest markets in America. But it was one that I couldn't pass up. And despite the fact that I am not the biggest fan of snow, Chicago is an incredible town. And the Chicago cluster of stations, not only Light FM, but GCI, Kiss FM, I mean, just V103, just heritage brands. And the opportunity to work with those brands was something that I couldn't pass up.
And at this point, are you going back into more of a day-to-day role? Are you able to roll up your sleeves and work on the station, or are you still more in a kind of bigger picture programming role?
So from that standpoint, I was much more hands-on day-to-day in Chicago. And I worried that might not be what I wanted to do long-term. Like I got a taste of running a region, and I love that. But I also knew that if I could effectively run Chicago and build upon what Darren had established, that those opportunities would present themselves again.
Sure.
And so that was one of those moments where you bet on yourself. And I'm like, I'll get back into the senior leadership, but this feels like the moment that I need to take.
And that bet paid off. Not only did you get to program, it worked out. Not only did you get to program to a legendary station, but you get promoted just a few years later to the SVP, EVP of programming. And this is in your notes to me, covering too many markets to name. So now that a regional VP of programming gig, it literally goes up by a whole other order of magnitude, and you're now overseeing hundreds of radio stations, still based in Chicago, but now I assume you're spending a great deal of your time traveling around the country to the various stations.
Yeah, I mean, the travel became intense. The markets, there was a conversation at one point. I don't know what triggered this, but we were looking at geography, and had my division been like an actual company, we would have been the fourth largest radio company in the US. So it was a lot. We had stations in the region, literally in every time zone. It was a wonderful experience. Got a lot of miles. And learned a lot.
Who called you and said, "Hey, I've got a great idea, Tony. How do you feel about this role?"
Well, this was during the early days of Bob Pittman coming into the company, and
okay.
and Bob, I mean, for anyone that's ever met him or worked for him, he is a disruptor, and he likes to try different things, and the way that we divided the company up at that time was challenging, but there were a couple people that remain great friends. Matt Martin, Brian Olson, they were in charge of the regions at that point, and I will again, I've been fortunate to have some fantastic mentors along the way, and they helped me make that transition, because that was not an easy one.
Yeah, I could, again, have a whole other episode just on that. I would love to learn more just on the operations of it and making that happen, and trying to, take in all this information, and also, give people the leadership advice they need. And those, I can't even imagine there's enough time in each day. So I'm sure you run it like a very precision clock. How do you prioritize when you are you touched about on this a little bit when you were running you had the regional position, but are you prioritizing just based upon the stations that need the most amount of help, or just how big the fire is? How did you prioritize your day when you're dealing with hundreds of radio stations?
So more often than not, you are following the biggest fire of the day. And especially when you have a territory that large, there's always going to be a fire. And what I had to also learn was some days there are bigger priorities that if you don't address them right away, they'll become the next day's fire. And so it's balancing out your day to look at, where am I needed most and where can I help the most? Some days those two are aligned. Most days those two are completely separate. And so it's a matter of finding the time in your day to address both of those columns. And eventually you have less of the fires that could have been prevented from flaring up.
When you're working with guys at Bob's level and Rich Bressler's level and Greg Ashlock's level, obviously all incredibly bright and accomplished professionals, did you go to them seeking advice for certain things, or most of these things you had kind of learned along the way to be able to handle, or a combination of both? It's
a combination of both. We're never done learning, and we can learn from everyone. And it doesn't have to be, the C-suite. You learn fantastic lessons from, the new 20-year-old that's walking in that knows everything and is cocky, but they're confident enough to say things that other people may hold back from you. So I try to learn from everyone, but absolutely I would seek their counsel. And some of it just, you make enough mistakes along the way that you start to figure out what works and what doesn't.
Well put. That cocky guy that left LTW in New York does have something.
Exactly.
Something to teach you. In 2000, you become a division president. So now you're a president of the company. You're the president of the metro markets. Plus, you launch a brand new network that I want to get into called the Black Information Network. Tell me a little bit about being the division president for the metro markets, and then I'd love to learn more about the Black Information Network and all the success you've had over the last 3 years, actually 4 years now, since launching it.
Yeah. So for me, similar to when I started feeling that move to go from being on air to being in programming, I was fortunate enough to work with, some great division presidents. And I saw the impact that they were having on the business. And I started being drawn in that direction. And I didn't know when I was going to make that transition, but I knew that it was a move that I wanted to make. Still love programming. I loved it then. I still love it now, but I really want to make sure, especially as I get older, that I'm having a broader impact and a lasting impact. And for me, becoming a division president was an opportunity to do that. And so despite my travel schedule and family schedule, I've got a great wife who was patient enough when I said, I want to get an MBA. And so started working on that because I knew people don't move from programming into those roles. It just doesn't happen because usually those roles are dependent upon sales experience. You had to have X years, being a sales manager and a market president and things. And so since I knew that I didn't have that background, I needed to develop some skills and prepare myself in other ways. And so got the MBA. And
unreal. I did not. I'm just learning this for the first time. I had no idea that you got your MBA. That is so hard. And you were doing that while overseeing hundreds of radio stations. I can't even imagine, and raising a family. That's amazing, man. Absolutely amazing.
Well, thank you. But that one I do have to give all the credit to my family because the sacrifice is one that they paid at that time. I did not get to spend the time that I wanted to with them, but I'm so thankful that they were, patient with me along the way. It's kind of funny. My oldest son is great with math. And so having your son help you with math classes was entertaining. But yeah, so I got the MBA, became a division president, and made that move in 2020. The universe is a very, very cruel thing because, becoming a division president at the beginning of a pandemic is not something for the faint of heart.
I'm sure.
But again, much like any of the bad things that any of us have gone through, it defines you and it helps you. And so I'm thankful for that. But simultaneously, when I was on the programming side, we had already started having conversations about launching this news network for the Black community. We saw that trust in news in the Black community was on the decline. People were buying into the fake news narrative. And especially in the Black community. And what I had shared with Bob and Rich and others was, if you look at the lack of newsroom diversity across America and how many stories either aren't being told about the Black community or were being told through a political lens or filter, it shouldn't be shocking to us that the Black community would have a lack of trust and faith in news. And so we had begun the process of moving towards launching this network right about the same time I became a division president. And what we had decided was I had at the time 22 markets that I was going to oversee. And BIN, really, when you think about it from an operational standpoint, would be like market 23. And so that's how those two worlds merged together for me, and blessed with a fantastic team there to really handle day-to-day programming decisions and things like that. And my approach was much like that of a division president. It's like, okay, I'm responsible for the financial growth of this and for the strategic vision. And it certainly makes for a taxing day, but no day is boring when you're dealing with a 24-hour news operation.
In talking about just well, first of all, let's go to the MBA, and then I want to get into BIN. You are really left brain, right brain. You are a phenomenal programmer, incredibly creative. You've been on air. You've been a very successful, turned around Warm in Seattle, and I've had all this rating success. You've now you've gotten your MBA. You're overseeing now the business side of 22 markets. And now you're going to launch a whole news organization. I mean, this is like launching an ABC or CBS. I mean, you've got reporters and newsrooms, and this is a 24/7. And know so little about it, but I've got a whole just level of respect for the news, because it literally is, you are purposely chasing fires. You are constantly going after every breaking news story and trying to obviously report on it and fairly and so forth. What was that like, just building a news organization from the ground up? Where do you even start?
So Chris Berry, who's the EVP of news for iHeart, he and I have known each other for years, and I think that he is probably one of the greatest minds in news, and being able to lean into him and his experience was invaluable. But I think one of the most interesting pivots that happened for us happened because of the pandemic, quite honestly. I vividly remember being with Chris in New York in early 2000, March, by the way, and at the moment being sick with the worst quote unquote flu that I'd ever had. You can call me patient zero now, I guess. But hiring the team. And at that point, the plan was to build out a news hub operation in Atlanta. And we were hiring people with the intent of them moving to Atlanta. And when suddenly everything shut down, we had to pivot, because it's like, how are we going to do this? We don't know when things are going to go back to normal. We don't know what things are going to look like. And it was during that, when everybody started doing their shows from home, we said, could we actually build a better network allowing reporters to be anywhere in the country? And so we had to pivot off of our plan of an Atlanta build out. And I, to this day, as much as COVID was horrible, and I certainly don't think any of us want to relive any of that, it forced us to have an innovative approach. And I think that we are a better organization today because we have reporters, black reporters, black writers in New York and in Huntsville, Alabama. That would not have happened. And the stories and the content that they bring to us because of that geographic diversity, we're better for that. And so I'm thankful for that. But getting the network up and running, and then, oh, by the way, as we're in the process of doing this, George Floyd is murdered. And now there's social unrest. And so when you look at everything 2020 threw at us, it was an insane time to launch a news network, but it's one that I will look back on all of the moments in my career. And the launch of BIN will be one of the most special things that's ever happened. Congratulations with all your success. Certainly everything we talked about, but launching BIN, you had made a comment earlier, and I may be taking it out of context, but I think it had to do with legacy. And from looking at what you've done and building this out, and I know it's collective in a team effort, but certainly under your stewardship, I think that BIN is something that really is a legacy. I mean, that is building hopefully we're going to look back at this, 20, 30 years down the road, or your kids will look, 40, 50 years down the road, and it will persevere like CNN has, or, CNBC. It's an actual network. And I think, what's behind it, the mission is incredible. And I want to congratulate you on that and all the hard work in putting that together. You're the first person I've ever met that, I guess Jeff Samuelian kind of technically started the sports format, I guess. Yeah. But I mean, you've literally built and started a network and a format. And there's not many people that can say that they've done that. So congratulations. Thank you. It truly has been a special experience. And now watching the team, and, The tough part about building something is you start with a lot of people who are early in their careers, and then they get bigger and better offers and they leave you. And so it's been tough to see people move on, but it's also been one of those things where, they got their start at BIN, and that's a good feeling.
For sure. And you'd said this, and I want to get into just the community work you've done, but before, in this comment just made me think about it again, that you made, helping others, and you've had so many amazing mentors in your career, and you've really done that. And I think that's so important, helping young people. And as we look at this industry, and we certainly have some challenges with audience erosion and obviously more choices for people to spend their time than ever before, getting young people, getting the next Ryan Seacrest, the next Charlemagne, getting them involved in the industry, I think is so important. And I appreciate everything that you do in terms of your leadership in this, in the broadcast community.
Thank you. Again, I have to credit Dave Robbins. Over the years, and especially early on when opportunities would come up. And by the way, there were some opportunities that Dave is like, you're crazy. Don't even consider that. And, he was right. But I would always say, how can I repay you? Like, you have made such an impact. And his comment was always the same. Just do it for somebody else. And he's like, when you help others, you will understand why I help you. You will understand you get more out of it than they often do. And I couldn't appreciate that back then. But as always, he's proven to be right. And I enjoy that. I get just as much, if not more, out of helping other people than I think they ever do. And so at this point, it's easy. It's something that I truly enjoy. When I see other people advance, when I see them get, these great opportunities, I get excited. It's a good feeling.
The industry needs more people like you, Tony Coles. We really do. In addition to your gigantic executive position at iHeart, you also serve on the board of directors for the RAB and the NAB, the Leadership Foundation. You are the national board of directors for Big Brothers and Big Sisters of America. Tell me a little bit about what you do for Big Brothers and Big Sisters of America. You're also the vice chair for them, correct?
Correct. That organization, I'm biased, but I just can't say enough about the work that they do. For me, when you do have limited number of hours in the day, you want to make sure that you're having the biggest impact you possibly can. And for me, I've really chosen to narrow my focus of the volunteer work that I do. I want it to be around leadership and mentoring. And when the opportunity to join Big Brothers, Big Sisters on their national board came up, it was just a perfect alignment. And more than anything, when I got to know Artis Stevens, the CEO, when I got to know the board, these are people that are just so inspiring. The work that they do, the focus that they have, and the energy that they put towards mentoring others. I jumped in with both feet. It's a great organization. I mean, we have 30,000 kids right now that are on the wait list. 30,000 kids that, they've lost a parent. They've lost both parents. They need an adult role model in their life. And working with an organization to try to narrow that gap, and at the same time, simultaneously help the kids, the thousands of kids who are actually actively matched. I could go on for hours about my love for that organization.
Thank you for all you do. And I know I've mentioned this before. I wanted to personally thank you for joining the Library of American Broadcasting Foundation. I had asked you along with our chair, Heidi Raphael, and I honestly did not realize everything you had on your plate at that moment in time, yet you were so gracious to join us and help us with the library. I will do the very best I can to take on as much as that so you can go on and do this amazing work that you're doing for Big Brothers and Big Sisters and the NAB and the RAB and BIN. My last question for you, because I want to let you go. I could go on for hours and talk to you, Tony, with just such an amazing, fascinating career. But I want to leave you with one last question. What is your advice now for radio people who are wondering about the future of our medium and where are we headed?
I'm still as optimistic as I ever have been about this business. Does it look different? Absolutely. Are the delivery mechanisms and the platforms different? Absolutely. But at our core, we've always been storytellers and we've always connected with communities. That's the core and the essence of this business. And I don't see the need for that ever changing. I don't see a day where people say, no, I don't want someone to connect with my community. We have to be smart. We have to adapt. We have to understand that the expectations that listeners have, are changing. How they use our products are changing, but we're storytellers and we should never lose sight of that. And I get excited about what is storytelling going to look like? What is community engagement going to look like? I know it's going to be different, but I don't see that human connection ever being something that as an industry, we are not there to serve that need.
Tony, thank you for taking the time, for sharing your life, professional history with us. What a remarkable career, and anything that we can ever do to help you with Big Brothers, Big Sisters, or any of the community work, Black Information Network that you do not hesitate to ask, man. You are really awe-inspiring.
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity. I genuinely, by the way, have enjoyed the conversation with you.
Thanks for listening to Chachi Loves Everybody. If you like the show, we hope you leave us a 5-star rating and tell your friends. Make sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This has been a Benztown McVeigh podcast production. Hosted and researched by Dave Chachi Dennis. Executive producer, Darren Silva. Producer and editor, Jake Urbanik. Show coordinator, Estefania Padilla. Marketing and distribution, Suzanne Aksu and Robbie Gessel.